The most common things that we get asked for in a lesson is more distance and a better strike. So with the irons, that's compressing the ball and more club head speed. And it's something that most people are striving for, but can't actually ever achieve consistently because they're not recognising how to use their body in the most effective way to enable the motion with the golf club that they desire to happen. So for example, the majority of people we see have an early release. And if you've seen your swing on video, you've probably seen it yourself. A bit of an early release, maybe everything collapses at a time in the swing when everything should be maybe extending. So the swing's actually getting narrower when it should be getting wider. So just thinking of natural physics, just thinking of centrifugal force. If you throw something, it's accelerating as it's moving away from you. So essentially the body's a pivot and you're throwing whatever object it is away from you or swinging it away. For example, if this is a golf swing and we've got our arms attached to the club, as we're accelerating the club, the arms are getting pulled by the club because you're increasing that momentum through the velocity that you're generating. And so this momentum is pulling you. But the body's probably not going to allow you to create this if it hasn't got any mechanism to control it. So essentially the nervous system kicks in and we get the fight-flight response, and the body braces, essentially stalling the body for stability, and the arms take over because you've got to hit the ball, so you're generating speed, but everything collapses and we end up in this hunched kind of brace position, just as a means of maintaining dynamic balance. So we've got to recognise what it's like to maintain dynamic balance whilst enabling this thing to accelerate and pull us with our body opposing the force we intend to create. So if the body's recognising of this and what it feels like to oppose the forces after you've hit the shot, it's going to allow us to create the forces before the ball to create that speed we want for that club head speed, because the body feels comfortable with where it's going. It's not being compromised, it's not being overly challenged in a way that it doesn't recognise, or it's really compromising its balance and stability, and therefore it puts the brakes on early. So we often see this kind of strike and release pattern as opposed to one where the arms have been extended, we're accelerating the club and presenting a golf club with less loft to the ball. Now this is easy to do, or easier to do should I say, with half a swing. That's why pitching and chipping generally aren't such an issue, and you can do it with a practice exercise. You could even do it slow, and you could do it with an impact bag, and there's lots of different ways of people trying to achieve this, and you've probably tried them all. But the problem is, it goes a lot deeper than that. It's not just mechanical, it's not technical, it's everybody understands generally a golf swing. There's enough books and information out there. We all know what a golf swing looks like. We've read lots of books, we're all students of the game, but why can't we action it? Why can't we action our intention when we've got all this information? We know what we should be doing. We could even mimic a perfect impact position if you like, or our perception of a perfect impact position. And we can go through all these movements and almost stage it, but then when we want to actually do it, it looks completely different. The body's only going to allow us to use what it can essentially handle, what it can counterbalance. And that's where it all breaks down generally. If we take this for example, I've just got a wedge it's a loop with a plastic ring, it's rubber ring, it goes under the door or on top of the door, and you can attach a TheraBand to it, you can get them off Amazon, and a TheraBand, okay? So basically, for this exercise, it's a weight. If I want to stretch this TheraBand, I'm not tensioning this at all, I'm not physically lengthening it, I'm doing it by creating more speed here. But what I'm allowing to happen is I'm allowing this weight to swing. Now, if I'm starting here with a smaller swing radius, okay, and I want to now make it bigger, imagine there's the ball, imagine I want to increase the radius. So think of our swing radius increasing. How is this increasing through impact? Well, here it's quite, say, narrow, and I want to get it wider. See, it widens as I'm swinging down through, and it's it's actually getting wider and wider and wider, and then it comes back again. So it's actually just the weight of this and me creating the speed here that lengthens this. But in order for this to maintain its shape, if you like, its geometry, and for me to stay stable, I've got to be able to oppose that force. I'm not going with it. So how am I not going with it? Well, I'm opposing it, which enables me to let that go. So we can be narrow and then wider. Notice there's an acceleration here that I'm creating, and then we have to put the brakes on and let it swing. The body has to do the same thing. It's got to put the brakes on. Most of us aren't putting the brakes on and counterbalancing the force because we're not sure really what it feels like. And therefore, what is required to happen post-impact, if you like, into your finish, isn't actually happening. So therefore, what we intend to happen pre-impact can't happen because we don't have the necessary movements post-impact to counterbalance these forces we're going to be creating. The body's already aware of this, it already knows, and therefore it undergoes some kind of compensatory mechanism to create a strategy for speed, to maintain balance, and that's what appears on the video as our swing. But the intention's totally different. So what I want to do is use this. I've got a light TheraBand, I've wedged it under the door. You could attach it to something at ground level that's not going to move and that is well secured. Because these TheraBands, if obviously it loses connection, could fly back at you. And I'm going to stand at an angle here where I would fully extend the arm and club after impact. Now we've got to be able to oppose this force. So what does the body have to do? If there's any movement in that direction, we're going to fall over, we're going to go with it. The body's not going to allow us to do that. It's not going to allow us to make the movements here if we don't have the movements on the other side of impact to counteract and balance out these forces. So, the last thing we want to be doing is pulling. Any pulling action like this, that chicken wing that you might see, is basically your body pulling the club back to you. So just taking the club just to show you here, this isn't a swing fault, this is your body pulling the mass of the club head back towards you, essentially the pivot, to reduce the inertia, to reduce the challenge on your dynamic balance, whilst trying to create speed at the same time. Because if we allow the club head to pull us, we haven't got the necessary mechanism to balance the forces, so we may fall over. We may lose complete control. The body's trying to gain some control. So we've got to experience what it's like to counterbalance the forces to allow this to happen. We're going to do it with our body, and we're going to do it with the ground. We're going to use the whole body from the ground up. So we don't want a pulling action, we want the club to pull us. So how do I pull this without using my arm physically here, using all my kind of brute force to pull, when actually I want to let this swing go, I want to let this club head go and swing freely? We've got to do it with the body. We've got to use the pivot. So the body is turning literally away from the direction the club's swinging. Specifically, it's the lead shoulder. That's the swing centre. That's where all the levers are getting thrown from. And essentially, it's this that we have to move away from the direction the club's swinging. So the lead shoulder is going to go back, round and up. And that's pulling the TheraBand. No tension in the arm. Notice what the lower body's doing. I'm actually pushing back and I'm twisting away. I can even use my right foot here for stability, my trail foot, push to help me get more power, more twist. I'm actually pushing off my lead foot as well. I'm pushing up to get more power. So I'm tapping into the vertical force to ramp up these forces so I can pull this with more force, which essentially will allow me to swing it outwardly with more force. So there's a shift back, there's an extension here, and there's a rotation away from where the club's swinging. And I can really push off the ground to speed it up. Of course, this isn't going to happen in the swing because the club head's pulling us. We're just learning how to balance these forces to let this go. Now, this movement I'm making, this here, is the result of the forces I'm creating prior. So there's a movement we need to make prior to this to enable this to happen. And it's that what I want to look at. So what I want you to do, if you can, is find, or go and buy, a swimming noodle. Cut a bit off, I'd say about enough for the foot, so a foot long, and just chop it in half. And what you've got now is you've got your own trampette, you've got your own little trampoline. You'll probably see me use them in a lot of the lesson videos. What we've got is our own little trampoline. It's got rebound properties. So the movement that you saw me make there, which was a rotation away, a push off, and a shift back to counterbalance the golf club, this has a precursor movement. And this, essentially, if we start to reverse engineer it, is the opposite to what's being produced when we push off. So essentially we're preloading the body. To turn away, for this to go back, round and up, it has to go in the opposite direction, round, down and forward. And this is the loading phase in your golf swing. This is how you're going to create the big verticals that's going to essentially help to eradicate that chicken wing, enabling your levers to extend and transfer that energy through to the club. So to do that, we are literally shifting to the target. Okay, we're rotating away from the target. Okay, and because we are tilted forward, this is naturally going to be going down and round as we shift to the target. But to help us with the extension, because we want to push off to let everything go, we've got to flex. So I want you to imagine you've got a sponge ball or a foam ball here, right on in the lead groin there, on the hip flexor, top of the thigh. And what you're essentially doing is you're squashing it. So now there's flexion, there's a drop, because the drop allows us to pop. The rotation away from the target allows us to rotate to the target, and the shift towards the target allows us to push off back away from the target. We're creating a counter movement with our push off. So when we're swinging, all we've got to recognise in the downswing is this combination of movements for a counter movement in the loading phase for the movement we actually want. You don't need the sponge ball, just put your fingers there on the hip flexor at the top of the groin there and squash the fingers as you rotate away from the target. But what I want you to do is squash this foam wedge and feel the fingers get squashed and rotate away with the torso. So there's a shift, a positive shift in this direction, which allows us to squash the wedge as we're rotating away. And what this is going to allow us to do now, once we've loaded, is push off. And we push off back, and we get that movement there with the TheraBand. So we can take this movement now with the wedge, and we can go over here. And now create that counter move first, here. And then you can spring back. There's absolutely no tension in this arm here, I'm not pulling. This band is extending, it's getting stretched because I'm moving back up and away. Imagine that your arm is just an extension of this TheraBand. I can move further away if I want to feel a bit more resistance, or I could use a stronger band. We're starting to get a feel for how we need to move to counterbalance the forces that we're going to need to release the club for the speed and the strike. So the swing arc is widening. It's not narrowing. And then the body has to do something else to try and get a strike, like stay in flexion, slide to get a strike. We can actually push off and use the ground, use our body to use the ground, use the vertical force and the rotation and pushing off to let this extend. So now we've got this covered. This movement here, this can happen, which will enable us to strike on the way down with the levers more loaded, with more lagged, with the club lagged, and then as we're rotating now, the swing weight is behind us. So as we rotate, it gets thrown and accelerated and it's travelling away. So we can get that drop and pop. Some extension through the shot, and that's going to get rid of this kind of form and enable you to let this club swing and get that strike and extend. and explore what it's like to freewheel this swing and maintain balance. So think about where you're going, reverse engineer it, train the body to be able to handle these forces, and then what you're actually working on here can happen naturally.